Hello, welcome back to the Knit Yorker podcast, the podcast where we talk all about knitting. My name is Magali and I will be your host yet again. Before I get started in today's very interesting topic, I of course want to tell you what I'm wearing and what I've been making. I'm wearing the Luna tee by Charissa. It's a nice little tee made with a lot of ribbing. It's a Pearl Soho sweetgrass yarn that I got. I was not probably the best option, honestly, now looking back. It's a cotton alpaca combination, so it doesn't quite hold the shape very well, but I like the color, and I mean, it's very light and it wears very well. I kind of want to make more of this type of knit tops, short sleeve. So I liked it. I think I'm gonna make more in a different type of yarn, probably wool. This is what I'm wearing today. I finished it a few months ago. And what I've been knitting, I have really one project only going on. Can you believe that? I finished most of my projects. I don't know if you saw. I finished my vest that I've been working on for forever, and I kind of kept it secret for a while. So that was very exciting, and people really liked it. So I was really glad about it. And I also finished a few other projects. This top, I made a little short / TikTok / reel about it, so if you want to see that. But this is the Kuutar top, and I think I might have talked about this in one of my other podcasts about how I was in the middle of making this. And it's such a cute, lovely, delicate top. Has a lot of beautiful lace details, and it's kind of double-sided. It's the same on both sides, so this is gonna be a gift, but I sort of kind of want to keep it. And I made it with this yarn that I probably also talked about lots of podcasts ago, which I got in Montreal, and it was a yarn, I think it was like a linen and cotton combination. So very summery, very light, and it's gonna be great for the summer. And I kind of want to make another one, and I really like the yarn too. So it's hard to let this one go, but I did make it with someone in mind, so I will give it to her. But it's nice to have been finishing so many projects lately. But I just started one new project, and I'm gonna make a whole video about this one because I think it's gonna be a fun one to share, and I don't know, a little bit of a different vibe than what I've been doing lately. So I don't have much going on quite yet, just the bottom of it. It's gonna be the Owlery blouse by FabelKnitwear. A very simple so far. I think it's sort of like a raglan top. It has really big sleeves. Like I said, I'll make a whole video with all the details about that one, so definitely keep an eye on that. I think it's gonna turn out really nicely, but so far so good. But I've also been working on a new design, and I think I showed this in one of my other videos, but I'm actually gonna show a picture because I don't have it with me right now, and you'll see it better that way anyway. But this is the Dandelion top, which is a pattern that I designed for the spring and that I am currently testing. And as I was making this pattern and going through the process again of designing, it got me thinking about the topic of today, which is designing and releasing knitting patterns and how that process is. I feel like people have asked me about what that is like before as a pattern designer. I am in no way an expert. I've designed and released quite a few patterns myself, under a dozen maybe, but it's all, I don't want to have kind of like the imposter syndrome, because I have released them and I have made them and they're fine, people like them, but I just kind of figured it out on my own. Nobody ever taught me how to design a pattern, how to release, how to test, all of those things. I've said this before, and I have this toxic trait, I would say, good and bad, which is that I always think that I can teach myself anything, that I can learn anything on my own. I don't love taking classes. I don't know if it's like I'm done with school. I don't want to be in a classroom ever again unless I am teaching. That makes me a little stubborn, but that also means that sometimes I zigzag to the result a lot. I make a lot of mistakes that I probably wouldn't have made if I had someone over me telling me, don't do that. But it's part of the fun too, and I take you along for the ride most of the times. That's how I taught myself to knit, taught myself to sew, taught myself to crochet, taught myself to design patterns. So from that, with that in mind, that I am in no way an expert, and this is all just what I've learned by trial and error, I wanted to talk about the process because chances are, if you're watching this, you are interested on designing your own pattern, releasing it, and putting it out there. And so I thought I'd share what I've experienced so far designing my own patterns and what my own process is. I don't think there's like one way to do it. Just like there isn't one way to knit something. You can knit a sweater so many different ways, right? And it's the same thing, I think, with designing patterns. So again, keep that in mind. There might be other people out there that will give you a different tip or different ways of doing things. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong or that I'm wrong. It just means, different ways of getting to the same result or to the same idea. So this is what my process is like when I am designing a pattern. It all starts with an idea. Just like with most things in the world, I think it all starts with what is it that you want to make. And an idea can come from so many different places. Sometimes I'm watching a movie and I really like what someone's wearing and I kind of want to make something similar but not quite the same. Like, what if it was like that but the sleeves were different? Or what if it was like that stitch? Sometimes that happens also to me looking at other patterns or other things in general, like people wearing something and I see they're wearing knitwear that has a certain type of stitch and I'm like, how would that work in this other thing? Or sometimes it just comes to my head. I think like I really want to wear I think that's how I actually designed my first pattern ever, which is the Astoria top, and that's a very, very successful one. I would say a lot of people have told me that they liked it and I downloaded it. So that one came about because I literally was thinking like I really want to knit a sort of summery top, but every top that I was finding on Ravelry and elsewhere was not quite what I was picturing. I wanted something that had some shaping for the bust and all these different things, and I just couldn't find someone. So I thought, I might as well make it myself. And if I'm gonna make it myself, might as well make it in a way that I can share to people. So that's how I got into pattern knitting. And then since then, there's been other ways of designing. Sometimes I'm giving a prompt. I have been sponsored in the past by brands. For example, currently the one that I'm making, the Dandelion top, is it was sponsored by Hobby Yarn. So Hobby Yarn very nicely has invited me to some of their challenges, as they call it, where they give you a prompt and then they give you can choose whatever yarn you want. They give you suggestions of what kind of yarn they could give you out of their collection, and then they send you the yarn and you design it. And if you design a pattern that they want to release on their site, you can actually collaborate with them. So that's great, and I've done that a couple times, and that's a different way of designing for me because having a prompt and just kind of figuring something for that prompt is a bit different. So that's how again, in this example, I designed this. The prompt was spring, I think, bloom, getting to spring. And of course, immediately you think flowers. Oh, flowers for spring. Wow, how original. I wanted to use a stitch that looked like flowers, and I was thinking it would be nice to make a more spring summery top where the flowers were kind of, as if you were coming out of a field of flowers. That was my original idea. So that's how I came to find the Dandelion stitch, which I really like. I looked at several flowery stitches and I really like the flower of this one. And then I wanted, the idea was, have more stitches make a top where most of the stitches are at the bottom that look like flowers, and then as it goes up to the upper part of the top, and the flowers just kind of start to diminish until it's just stockinette. It's really the idea that drives everything, and you work backwards from that idea to figure out how does this get knit. I have often found that the simplest designs and the simplest ideas tend to be the ones that do the better, or the ones that end up being the best design. And I don't know, I think keeping it simple is good. That doesn't mean, design a stockinette hat or something, which there are tons of out there, or design something that simple. I don't know, sometimes I go too complicated and then I have to take a few steps back and strip it down and find what is the thing about this design that makes it unique, but also what makes it appealing that is similar to other things. So that's kind of where you want to put your head in. It doesn't mean design what everyone else is doing. You should always have your twist on your design, but we live in the world. We live in a society. And it's good to get inspiration from other people and what's been done out there, and you know, be informed, kind of. And I think that's the same with a lot of things. And in knitting, the more you know, the more you the more you research, the more you look at different things, you will have like a better idea of what exactly you want. So once you have the idea, it's time to actually think about how you're gonna make it. How is the construction? For example, if it's a sweater or a top, is it knit bottom up or top down, and why? Like, it's not just like, I wanna knit it this way, but it's more like the way it's constructed. How would you knit this? And I mean, if you have a knitting designer background where like you actually go to school for this stuff, I bet that they have reasons and theory behind the construction. But the way I do it, not having any of that in my background, is just kind of look at other things and how they're built. Even look at clothing that I own and that I wear, and how it's constructed and how the pieces are put together. And if I knit other sweaters, other tops, other anything that has been made by someone else, I started kind of store in my brain like, oh, this one's knit this way and that was actually easier, and this one's knit this way and it gives it this shape, and I just kind of start putting that information in my brain. And so when I get to knitting my pattern, sometimes I draw it, but then from there I have to think, well, how would you actually make it? How would you build it, basically? This is where I would say that having more experience knitting other stuff comes into play, and there's no really a way to skip that, I don't think. If you are a very beginner knitter, or if you want to knit something that you've never made from someone else before, it might be harder. It might be harder to get to it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's like, if you don't know how to walk, how would you teach someone else to run, kind of thing. So sometimes, you know, it might be worth it to take a few steps back and try to hone your skill a little bit more before you start designing your own pattern. Totally okay. Or start with something really, really simple, like a hat, and then you just focus on what type of stitch you're wearing, and not so much on the construction. Definitely something like tops, sweaters, and any other more complicated garment is not the best place to start. I would say, basically, if you're not confident in your knowledge, just practice more and then come back to the idea later. Don't just disregard it. Just kind of save it somewhere in your brain or in physically somewhere, and then come back to it when you feel more ready. Now, when it comes to actually writing the pattern, I've done it in two different ways. I've knit the whole thing and then later write it down, try to kind of like reverse engineer how is it that I made it, or even like knit it and then take notes as I go. The problem with that is that when you get to grading, it gets a little complicated, because you're not knitting it with other sizes in mind. You're only knitting it with the sample in mind. And for me, that's very important now, because I want to make this available for as many people as possible, and I want them to feel included. So I don't want to focus on just one size. Instead, what I've been doing is the reverse of that, which is writing it first, figuring it out on paper, and then following my size and find the mistakes and kind of like work them as I go. It also is easier because it feels like I'm following a pattern, but of course it's not going to be perfect. So there will be things that need to be changed. But it does give me kind of a way of having it written before it's finished, and having it graded before it's finished, before it's actually knit. And by the time I finish my sample, I will have something ready to test, rather than something that I have to figure out what the hell I did. So I found it, for me, it works much better that way. Again, it doesn't mean that that's the right way to do it. That's just how I do it. So in a way, I would say that I grade my pattern first, and then I knit it and I fix it as I go. So what is grading? What am I talking about? So grading a pattern basically just means calculating all the different versions of the sizes for each pattern. So you start with one size as kind of like the model size, or the, you know, home base, and then you try to create that design bigger or smaller, or for different body types, And again, this to make it available on as many sizes as you want. And this is probably, one of the most complicated parts, other than figuring out how to actually construct it, because you might think that it's as easy as, just multiply this bigger, but it's not really that way. You have to think about how people's bodies actually look like when they are different sizes. People's arms don't get longer just if they are larger, or their necks don't get that much bigger, things like that. So you do have to kind of keep that in mind. And one of my biggest sources, and I think for a lot of designers, is the Craft Yarn Council, which is a website and an organization that just has a lot of information about measurements, and they have standard measurements and sizes and charts where you can find for adults, for children, for all different kinds of things, for full body, for hands, for heads, for everything. So you can find measurements that are more standardized, and they have a lot of sizes. You're working from something that is kind of verified and closer to what real sizes are, and not just making it up as you go. So it's a little, I would say, safer, and they do a lot of work for you, really. What I do is I copy that information into an Excel file in a way that, whatever column that I'm working, that size always has that standardized sizes at the top for different parts of the body. So depends on what you're knitting. But if, for example, in the case of this top, I would want to know what is the standard size for the chest, for the waist, for the armhole, which is something you can find there too, things like that. I put all of that information in my Excel file so that I always have it there, and that I can actually reference it in my calculations later. But once you have that, you also have to figure out what are the sizes of your garments specifically, which are not going to be exactly the same, right? Because it depends on what you're knitting. Is your pattern something looser, then it's going to be bigger than the actual body measurements. What is the ease of the garment? Which means, like, how close to the body is it? Is it loose or is it tight to the body? Then the measurements are probably going to be closer. It's like, how is it meant to be worn? And again, in my Excel file, I have that underneath the standardized body measurements, and then the measurements of my actual garment. So, when you're grading a pattern, I have all that information together in one place so that I'm not jumping around, and then I have it very easy. Excel is my best friend when grading and when designing. Honestly, I spend so much time on Excel figuring it out, but it's not hard, really. You gotta kind of think about the logic of it. Having the size, the measurements of your garment, having the measurements of the person that is gonna wear it, and then figuring out your gauge. Those are like the three most important numbers that you want to have there, and everything else will come out of this. Usually when you see a pattern, the gauge is either 10 centimeters or 4 inches, and I start from that. I make my own swatch, and I measure it and put that information into my Excel file, and then I figure out what is the measurement for just 1 inch or 1 centimeter. That's another thing. You gotta choose if you're gonna be working on inches or in metric, just because, of course, you can't jump back and forth. But it doesn't matter what you choose as long as you stick to it. So once you figure out how big it's just 1 inch, which you can measure, but I like to figure out the 4 inches and then extrapolate the 1 inch just by dividing that number by 4. And that's going to be the number that I'm going to keep referring back to, because that is kind of like your holy grail of designing. That's going to create the measurements for figuring out everything, like how long the top's gonna be. You use that inch measurement for the rows to figure that out. You multiply it and you figure that out. It's all a game of math after this. Like I said, I usually start from the one size that I'm sample knitting and then extrapolate to the others, but it is just kind of figuring out with the measurements and with your gauge and with knowing the construction, how big things are. So I'll give you an example again with the Dandelion top so that I can kind of walk you through the logic of it. The dandelion top is knit bottom up, like I said. So the first thing I would need to figure out is what is the measurement for that width of that top, because the top is supposed to be worn kind of close to the chest, but then looser at the waist. I wanted to make it kind of like a square top. So that means I'm gonna use the chest measurement as kind of like the standard of how wide that is, and that's gonna help me figure out how many stitches I'm gonna cast on, because I don't want to add increases. I want it to be straight. So then I multiply the chest measurement for the size that I'm doing, and I multiply that by the number of stitches per inch that I figured out earlier in my gauge. And that's going to give me a number, but it's not quite ready yet, because I know that this is going to be knit in the dandelion stitch. The dandelion stitch, it needs to have a multiple of 8 in order to work, because you always have the 4 dandelion stitches and the 4 stitches in between each dandelion. So the number that I get is not a multiple of 8. So using my Excel, I can ask it to round it up to the closer multiple of 8. And then I get my cast on stitches. So now I know exactly how many stitches to cast on for that size. And I can copy paste that calculation for all the other sizes using that chest measurement. And there you go. That's how you get the cast on stitches for this specific project. So like I said, I can't give you like this is exactly how you do it for every single pattern, because that doesn't exist, because you have to figure it out with your construction, your design, and everything. But it's just finding that logical steps to get to it that will allow you to do the math. Hopefully I haven't lost all of you by now. But this is what you would do for each measurement. This is how you would, the same thing, figure out how long something is, multiplying by the rows, the measurement that you need, how many decreases to go from one number of stitches to another, how many decreases is that, you can divide it or subtract in order to figure that out, etc., etc. So again, I stick to Excel a lot. It's my best friend. I kind of figure it as I go. And because I am grading and then knitting kind of at the same time, grading and writing it first by section as I go, and then I'm knitting it, I figure out mistakes, because not always the what you write on paper is not going to be always correct. There's always little mistakes. So as you're knitting, you'll figure that out and you'll have to go back and fix that. So that's the next thing. Actually knitting your own sample is definitely very different than just knitting a pattern, because again, you're figuring things out as you go, and you will find yourself ripping stitches a lot, unraveling and redoing and doing it again and again and again. There's been projects where I've casted it on like 5 or 6 times before I can figure out exactly what I want it to look like. Sometimes the design evolves, and my original idea, once I knit it, doesn't quite look what I was thinking, so it evolves into something else, and that's okay. It's all part of the process. But I would say you have to go into it knowing that you're not just gonna sit and knitting and done. It's definitely a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of ripping your knitting and starting over quite a few times. Maybe not for the whole thing, but definitely for different sections. So be mindful of that, and like I would say, don't get frustrated. It's okay. It'll take as long as it needs to take. Once it's actually figured out, it'll be easier for the testers to knit it a little faster. So that is the next step, testing. And testing is so important, because just like with your sample size that you're knitting, you will find mistakes and changes in the paper version of it. There will be other mistakes that you didn't think of on all the other sizes. Less, but there will be. And sometimes the calculations aren't quite right, and your testers are going to be such an important resource to tell you that. And finding testers is not super hard. I mean, as long as you have pictures and clear information about what your pattern is and the sizes available, and that you put it out there and tell people exactly how long you need them to knit it for, you should be able to find people. People usually are really interested in knitting, testing patterns. And I would also recommend to do some test knits yourself for other people to see how their process goes, and just to learn about their designs as well, and their testing process and everything. You'll pick up things from that, and in the end, we're all a community, so the more we help each other and the more we can learn from each other, I think is the best, and how we grow together. So I totally recommend testing yourself. I've done it too. And then, keeping that community sense to find other testers. And I gotta say, sometimes it's frustrating. You think you got it right, you think there's no mistakes, and your testers are gonna find them and they're gonna tell you, and it's gonna just be like, but that's what the process is for. We want to make sure that there are no mistakes, and that you have at least one person testing each size that they can tell you, like, this is right or this is wrong. They can also find grammar mistakes. They can also find when things are not written in a way that is understandable. So yeah, test knitters are the best. I love them, and I love my test knitters. I'm currently testing my Dandelion top too, so I'm going through that part of the process. It does feel a little more hands off as you let them do it and tell you what's wrong and then fix it, but it is very important, definitely. So if you've gone through all of that, if you've actually figured out an idea and how to make it, and graded it, and sample knitted and tested it, it's time to release it. And releasing can be a little scary, because it is a lot of work to put into something and then putting it out there, and not really, it feels like you're throwing it into the void. I'm sure it's different for like pattern designers that are huge, but for us little people, it can be scary. But it's in the end, it's you do your best. You put it out there as much as you can. Ravelry and Etsy are good websites, just because people that don't follow you or know you will find the pattern just by finding similar ones. But I would say, try to remember that people sometimes see a pattern and they like it and they save it, but they don't buy it right away. I do that myself, because it's not something that you just want to hoard as much, but something that you want to get to when you get to it, and then you will buy it. So just because it doesn't get tons of downloads on the first week or weeks that you put it out there, doesn't mean that eventually people will find it and enjoy it. Because that's, in the end, that's the purpose, right? You want to see other people making it. You want to see the versions of it that other people make. Anything that helps it get there, and giving it time and patience will definitely make it a more rewarding experience, I would say. I guess I had a lot to say about that topic, because like I said, I'm in the middle of it. The Dandelion top is not quite released as of the date that this was posted. Hopefully very soon it will be released. I'm aiming for mid-March. Again, this is right now in the hands of my test knitters, so it all depends on how fast they are and how many mistakes we find, but it'll be worth it. And this is a top that I'm really excited about. It's my second collaboration with Hobby Yarn. I really enjoy their cotton yarn, and I really enjoy designing this and having like kind of a challenge of having a prompt and figuring out something from that. And I am looking forward for it to be warmer weather so I can actually wear it out. Definitely keep an eye out for that pattern coming out very soon. You can follow me on Instagram, but I also actually have a newsletter, and I know how annoying newsletters can be, where people are just like sending you emails like every day. I am not like that. I do not like doing that. I really see my newsletter as I want to give you important information. So you will only get emails from me when I release a pattern, when I'm trying to test a pattern maybe, and when I have some sort of sale or discount going on. So I'm not going to email you every week and tell you like, oh, this and that, and remember I have patterns you can buy. I'm not going to be like that. But if you want to be the first to know when the pattern is releasing, that is definitely one of the best places to go. You get it directly on your inbox, and you can click and get it or save it, because like I said, you don't have to buy it immediately. You sometimes just like it, save it, and then eventually when you get to it, buy it. That's fine too. But if you're interested in this pattern, definitely consider joining my newsletter below, or following me on Instagram, where that's where you'll know. And hopefully this is a helpful video conversation, podcast, whatever, about designing patterns. I know it's a lot. I know it's kind of scary, if I can figure it out on my own, you can too. I think anyone can. And just like everything in knitting, it's just a matter of perseverance, I think. So if you have a great pattern idea, chances are that other people will want to make it too. I know that I would want to make it. So put it out there and let me know what questions you have about grading or designing or releasing a pattern or anything. I would be very happy to help or respond or clarify things in the comments. It's a topic that's very near to my heart and something that I've been doing for a few years now. So whatever knowledge I can impart or share, I'd be happy to. That's all I have for today. I will see you in the next podcast. Have a great day and happy knitting.